started, everyone. Be respectful of your time. I think I have an hour, so that is good. Cool. Well, welcome everybody. This is design for developers or for non-designers. I'll get into what we're going to talk about. First off, my name is PaulTrani. I work for Adobe as a web evangelist. My background is design, so I started thinking about, I graduated in, 95 from art school, from Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design in Denver. So yeah, I have some experience under my belt, which means I just made a lot of mistakes, guys, so hopefully you guys can learn from those. But at the end of the day, I'm still like a 4-year-old at heart, because I love just creating stuff and making cool things, and I love the technologies that enable me to do that. So I'm just kind of curious. Here's 2 shirts, and this is just to figure out who's in the room. So I assume, which shirt is funny? Yo, that curtain is tight, or there are only 10 types of people in the world. Those who understand binary, those who don't. So which one? Who likes the shirt on the left? You guys like that? Oh, that's good. Yo, that curtain is tight. You like both? Okay. So again, and then you have the one. I don't even understand that one on the right. What does that even mean? Again, that's the whole idea. Is like you whatever you sort of gravitate to, just sort of kind of almost who you are as a person to a certain degree. But this is for developers. It's also for designers. Hopefully, you'll get a lot of this out of this. But this is not a technical session, so that means I'm not going to talk about CSS and drop shadows and all that stuff, like that technical stuff. You guys are probably smarter than me in that area. Okay, I'm going to show you sort of when you would apply, say, a drop shadow and things like that. Because sure, we do rounded corners, we have web fonts, all this stuff available to us. But when do we use this technology at our fingertips? And I promise not to sound like a douche. Like some designers are like, I'm not going to get all high and mighty on you guys. I want this to be really practical for you. I want you to be able to go out and apply this right away. So that's my goal, is to make it directly applicable to whatever you're designing. Okay? So that's the goal. All right. So why does it matter? We can get into interaction design and all this stuff. But the short of it is they've done plenty of studies around sort of attractive things. People think it works better. People think it's more expensive. Today we're in an era of experience, and you would think it's quality. It's like how many people go to Starbucks and you buy a coffee. You can make that same coffee at home, but you're having this whole experience of going to a Starbucks and getting a fancy drink. You make the same thing at home, but that's where we're at today. We're in sort of more of an experience economy, as some would say. But I thought this was interesting. This is just a study about ATMs, and they had 2 different ATMs. One of them was nice and sexy and looked good, and people who use these ATMs, they found out that again, both forms were identical in function. They did the exact same thing, number of buttons, everything was fine. But one of them had the buttons and screens arranged attractively, the other one didn't. Okay, and the Japanese found that the attractive ones were easier to use. Okay, so it's the whole perception of things easier to use because they are more attractive. And you're thinking, okay, wait a minute, that's the Japanese audience. They're going to be a little bit different. They got all that cool stuff, and they like it. It's elegant, it's like, I love Japan. But they duplicated the study, this time in Israel, and they found the same results. In fact, the results were stronger in Israel, which is where they duplicated it. Other side of the world, same results. Okay, so you can say attractive things, people perceive them as working better. So that's why this is important. Even just the little things you can do, whether you're prototyping, whatever the case may be, let's just spend a little bit of time making them look good. And there's a zillion different ways we can go with this, because when I say design, you think, it could be interaction design, it could be, all the different layers of design, like, you can get into focus groups. I'm going to assume you know your audience, and I'm going to assume you already have content. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about content, and I'm not going to talk about your audience. At the end of the day, you should know your audience. Here's a funny picture. They obviously don't know their audience. They're going to read, hey, on the side, of course. It's not going to go over too well. Okay, so know your audience, know what your audience knows. Okay, what are they doing? What are they interacting with? You know, obviously we're using phones, but even before that. Oh, you guys can hear this. I'll check this for you guys.
This is the amazing 26-inch panoramic flat CMYK full color display. And these are the photoreal 3D graphics. This is the very best in use, not waiting for it to download. Not squinting in sports on a tiny screen. Not turning it sideways to see it better. And these are the 7 free inbuilt games complete with pen touch interface, including crossword and double ticket. This is how easy it is to share content with friends. And all with a guarantee that you'll never lose reception again. There are no hidden charges. There's no contract needed either. This is the amazing 100% recyclable, no substitute for it, Sun newspaper version 4.0.
That's cute, that's funny. But I thought that was good because, you know, that's the whole idea of sort of skeuomorphism, taking a real-world object and replicating it in your interface. And where that comes from is you're taking what people are used to and implementing it on a screen. So that's where that comes from. Think of how you're applying interactive things. But that's all I'm going to talk about when it comes to interactive into sort of content, okay? And we get a little bit into that skeuomorphism right there. But these are the 3 areas I want to talk about because I think this is most important that you can hopefully apply on your daily lives. So layout, color, and type. So those are the 3, our little check boxes, okay? So let's start with layout. At the end of the day, layout's all about leaving your eye. Where's your eye go? First, second, and third. It's your reads, okay? And this is, again, a fun little example, if I could. Let's get out of here, and I'll just show you that same example. Let's take this, for instance. Leading the eye. So let's take this down by reads, okay? So you have your 3 content areas, whatever they may be. What's the first thing you see on this very washed out screen? Thank you. Let's do that. Let's jump into the C there. Let's go to this one. What? Go ahead and just call it out. C. Sorry, there's a pattern. You can close your eyes at this point. They're all. It is there. You can see. I don't know, maybe, but they're all C. So again, having that circular around that. So it's like, what was used to make this happen? In some cases it's color, in some cases it's spacing, in some cases it's obviously size, but it's all broken down in reads, okay? The directions, yeah, that's pointing to the C there, and then even when things are skewed. So you need to break things down in reads, and I should really have, the first one should just be sort of your A, B, and C. That's what happens is you throw things on a screen and they all have the same elements. You know, and then you'll start to make maybe the C larger and bigger, but is it necessarily larger and bigger that's going to be the best thing to do to draw attention to it? Because every single one of these, the C isn't just larger, it's different in different ways and draws your attention to it. And the biggest thing you'll run into from a client's perspective is they want everything to be the C, right? They want everything is important to the client. And that's the battle that we deal with. But at the end of the day, you have to break it down into reads, just like you would here. Alright, so let's take a look at the different concepts as far as layout goes, okay? And these really are the fundamentals. Alright, so I'm going to hit through about 8 different items that all deal with creating a composition. It doesn't matter who you are, a designer in the back of his head is doing this maybe intuitively, or maybe, you know, literally by following these steps. And I thought it would be good to break this down, okay? So it's like, one of the first things is order. In any sort of composition you see, there might be some sort of order, okay? And with a layout, you have order to things. And I'm going to point out some real-world examples in here. Obviously, parking lot has order. I don't want a lot of variety in a parking lot. So it serves a purpose. That's where I want to have the order. Okay? So that's your real-world example of order. Perfect, it fits. Okay, out of that order, what do you want to have? You want to probably have some variety. Okay, so we have everything in our boxes. What can we make sort of stand out And honestly, this is where advertising comes into place. It loves variety. It loves standing out. Same parking lot, I love this ad. This paint bucket spilling into this parking lot, which is cool. This variety kind of disrupts, and that's really what advertising does. So again, you have your order. Let's have a little bit of variety here. Okay, make it pop. Okay, going beyond variety, you have contrast. Really straightforward here. Honestly, you just have to make sure that things are easy to read, and it's going to help draw your focus, just like in the examples I showed earlier. And again, this is just a fun one. You do this with signs. Signs have contrast. It's black, and it's that like yellow color. Okay, and that contrast draws your eye. And I thought this was funny. Down at the bottom it says, also the bridge is out ahead. So, it's kind of fun. Okay, so we have contrast now. Symmetry. Symmetry is used a lot when it comes to architecture. And it's nice, provides a nice balance. But symmetry means it's exactly the same. The left is the same as the right, maybe it's the same as the top, the same as the bottom. Take a step back and we say, hey, you know what? Beauty has a lot to do with symmetry. Okay, so I don't know what this could be totally personal opinion, honestly it is. There's the face on the left and the face on the right. Like, which one do you think is maybe slightly more attractive? Okay, so the one on the right. Okay, so you're exactly right. Because what did they do? It's really just the left side of her face is the same as the right side of her face. Her face is basically mirrored. Okay, and on the left-hand side of that image is there's variation. So symmetry, when you take sort of what you might consider somebody a beautiful person, usually has to do with symmetry. Okay, and symmetry really is beautiful. It can border into sort of getting a little bit boring when it comes to layout, by the way. Then you have tension, okay? This is where things are almost touching. Sort of that tight but not touching. Really tight, they could be touching. This is usually not a good thing unless you're doing it on purpose, okay? So again, we have the creation of Adam, the creation of man, where we have that tension, where they're almost touching, but you can feel that tension right there. That's the focus of the piece. A real-world example of this is when you put text on a screen and maybe you have a page that's so wide, don't have your text go right up against the edge. Or don't have a shape, a circle, touch that edge, because that's going to mean some tension. Just move it in a little bit. Just give everything a little bit of padding, and that will just make for a more appealing interface. All right, going beyond tension, we have balance. Like, hey, didn't you just talk about balance? Didn't you talk about symmetry? Yeah, kind of. But really, it's having things balance each other out. And I don't know if this is a great example, but I was looking for something where it's not the same, but it still has balance. And there's lots of examples of this. You can have something really shout up at the top of your page. Maybe this is your logo or your big image. And then you have something maybe smaller down in the lower right, just to kind of balance it out. Okay. Otherwise, it's kind of boring. It's like, hey, I got this big image, and now I'm done. Well, now balance, being able to add additional content to balance out the picture you have. Scale is obvious, and I go back to the client scenario. What does the client want you to do? Is they're like, you know what? Make my tagline bigger, because this is really important to me, and we're going to make it shout. That's what they do, and they think, okay, scale, make it bigger. And bigger isn't always better. Bigger doesn't necessarily draw your eye to it more, necessarily. But there's many things you can do with scale, which is kind of fun. All right, texture. Texture I absolutely love, because you can take, again, I look at the classic sort of login screen. You might have just a little piece of information on a big white page. You can keep it white, by all means, keep it elegant, but if it's starting to feel empty, first of all, don't feel like you need to fill it with stuff, but just that little bit of texture is all you need. I think of the linen on iOS devices. That gray linen texture nothing's really there, but it helps fill in that space. So when I look at something, when I know there's not a lot of content, I look at filling in just a nice texture that's appropriate for the design, okay? And just a good example. Obviously, if you have this texture of the sky, otherwise, if you didn't have that, honestly, it'd be kind of a boring picture, in my opinion. And again, along with texture is space. This is so important. It's just having space with things. Because again, that really signifies a certain amount of elegance. And I think of high-end department stores when I think of space. Because if I go into a Kenneth Cole, honestly, I have no idea. Technically, I have no idea how much these items cost. But I'll tell you right now, they look expensive. Just because of the space we have there. There's something about space that really makes things sort of elegant and more high-end, okay? And I feel like we're getting at a place with mobile apps where we're really focusing on sort of these single tasks where we have space to just do one or two things. So space is really important. Again, I compare sort of your picture of Walmart to your picture of your Kenneth Cole, two totally different stores. You have, and really, let me just go back to that, guys. I have to go back to space. And I start to think of simplicity, because probably the biggest mistake you make as a designer, which I did all the time starting out, is adding too much. You kind of start, maybe you open up Photoshop or something, and you're just like, you start throwing effects at it, and it's just like, you get a lot going on there. You got a lot of toys in your little toy chest. And really you need to be able to simplify. So it's like the whole quote of, you know it's done, when, not that there's no more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away from it. So start taking a look at your design. And I do this. I gotta take a look at it and say, you know what, is this really helping the design, or is it just adding more to it? So the best thing you can do is honestly add less or take away. All right, Shay, please don't get offended at this. But this happens. That's why I point this out. I don't want this to be you. If you were, say, for instance, the architect or whoever, the groundskeeper here, and I don't want this to be you. Because whether you like it or not, whether it's your boxes that you create in a form, what sort of shape does it make? Sometimes they start to make these weird shapes. Do you have something kind of like that? Does your interface look like a stop sign inadvertently, like an octagon? Do you want that? Because you're kind of getting that whole idea. I apologize for that. It's offended. Okay. Because shape has a lot of meaning, so I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into shape. Okay, so we kind of understand, positioning items, sort of big versus small. Don't have everything like the same. Have things pop out. Maybe have some balance there. Kind of getting all of this, like absorbing all this information. When it comes to, sort of interaction design, let's take a closer look at this stuff. I'm sorry this is so washed out. Those are two shapes. One's inverse, starburst. Which one's just in general easier to look at? The circle is easier, right? Because the other one looks like it's going to poke your eye out. It's like have all these like spines and things like that's a lot of general just information that you have to read. Obviously, the circle is going to be easier. Take that to the point of a rectangle. And you can, again, get all like kind of out there on some of this. But if you have a rectangle, are those corners kind of leading your eye out of the picture? Okay? And in art school, we learned like natural arrows that are sometimes made, like the flow of things. You don't want it to lead the person's eye out someplace where it shouldn't be. You have to be mindful of the direction of things. The sharp corners, they say, and there's a study where they, did some research on this as far as rectangles. So we said, hey, you know what? Let's round those rectangles. And I guess this is just easier on your eye. This is part of, hey, that's why these rounded rectangles are everywhere. They're actually easier on your eye. Keeps your focus sort of inside of this shape, and it's just nice, smooth, continuous line. I don't have to worry about, these corners. So there's a whole study behind that, but that's there's some psychology behind the very basics of things, which is just a, rounded rectangle. Kind of interesting. All right. This is where I feel like we kind of get into that artsy, ooh, this golden ratio, the golden mean, does that fall in the golden mean? You know, which is really just a way of dividing up your content, okay? So it's 1 by 1.6803, okay? So we have our 1 on one side by 1.6 on the other side. The short of it here is there's not balance. There's something I need to focus on in the main area, and then you can easily see, hey, that looks like a column for additional content. Again, in art school, you would never, again, rules are meant to be broken, by the way, but you would never split, I could never do an illustration where I split it down the screen with like a line or something. You know, because then you don't know which way to look necessarily. So that's where this golden ratio started to come from, and people started to look at it in nature. You guys might have seen this, like, hey, wait, you got your, you know, your forearm, and you can get really, really into this. You know, you got your 1.618 to 1, you know, and then your finger has the same ratio. Oh, it's blowing my mind. Oh, the sun, the earth, the Venus, you know, you start to build, you start to see this everywhere. I don't know. Take it for what it's worth, but you start to see it in a lot of different places. Whether it's deliberate in art or, you know, in nature. But I think it's pretty cool. The short of it is, just don't split your content right down the center. You know, if we take Twitter, for example, we have that column. It's like, I mean, you would never know this. Oh, the golden mean in the Twitter interface, you have this column, sort of your 1 by 1.618. Well, that's really interesting. And in Photoshop, in the crop tool, there's actually the same golden ratio, by the way. So, they have it like as an overlay. But that's pretty cool. Golden ratio, short of it is, you know, have columns that are equal. And somebody went to the, and I'm sorry this is so washed out, somebody went to the trouble of taking an iCloud logo from Apple and noticing that everything is 1 by 1.618. So all the little circles, he went in and discovered this. Like, who has time for that? For one, gosh, man, smart man. And you're like dissecting this little bit on you. Anyways, you start to see it in lots of places. So that is layout. And I'm going to show you at the end of this presentation sort of how you put all of this together to make a design, by the way. Okay, so that's your layout portion. I know it's a lot. That's probably the longest section. Okay. All right. So let's get into color. Okay. We'll get into color and typography. We have color. Okay. And really the primary use of color, we talk about it all day long, but it's to emphasize importance, not necessarily to decorate the page. And I thought that was pretty good. You add color to emphasize importance, to potentially draw your eye. Remember when we played that little game earlier and finally, you know, sort of like the C, in one of those cases, the C was larger in orange? You know, that's a case where using color to draw your attention to an area. But you just don't add color all willy-nilly all over the place necessarily. But let's kind of go through that. So I started getting the color wheel. Okay. Because honestly, you're going to have to add, you're going to be adding color to some degree anyways. And again, I'm sorry this is so washed out. You have the color wheel. So you have all your primary colors right here. You have your red, your blue, and your yellow. And then you get into your second, so you have your secondary colors as well. So these are your mixture of your first two. Okay, so your mixture of, you know, red and blue make that purple, and then red and yellow make orange. Those are your secondary, and then you can get into tertiary colors. So be aware of, you know, color. If you do have to use a color, which usually comes from a logo, to be honest, usually by branding, I would pick that color and say, okay, what is, not necessarily like, you know, maybe it's a primary, secondary, or tertiary, but is it, I would start to look at the complementary color. I take that color and look at the opposite one, okay? And this is going to create this nice balance. It's like, okay, you got this red logo, has some pop, let's cool it down with, you know, a green color, okay? And this is how I remember it. So it's like you have Christmas, you have Denver Broncos, because I'm from Denver, so that's for me, Denver Broncos. But, you know, they picked those colors for a reason. LA Lakers in sports teams. What else do we have here? That's the short of it, but you can see where these colors have come from, say, even in teams' colors. They did it deliberately. It's usually pairing a warm color with a cool color. It's always going to be sort of the opposite color. Sometimes what I do is I'll take like a split complement. Okay, so this is taking the color that was chosen by branding or whatever, and then you have your split complementary colors. So you can easily see how you have your primary color, your secondary color, and then your highlight color for buttons or whatever. Okay. So split complement I think is good for interfaces. And you know, you can go through all of this and we can really start dissecting it, but that's the short of it. The best thing you can do is pick a color and try to find out what is the opposite color of it. Okay? But you have to make sure it's the exact opposite as far as intensity as well. Okay? The most obvious sort of mistake that people make with color is they might not have the same intensity. So let's take a look at color tone. So we have, you know, take red, for instance. Is it the same shade or tint of red? Okay? So if they added a little bit of white to that red, it washed it out, it changed the tint. If I pick a green color for this red color, I have to make sure it's the same sort of washed out tone. And that's the best thing I can do, is make sure it's the same intensity. Okay? Whether it's primary pure red or a washed out red like these show. And that goes, you know, again, for any one of the colors, as you can see here. So know the intensity and be prepared to pick the exact opposite in intensity for that color. It's when you have a really bright orange versus a really muted taupe color that things start to look a little weird. All right, so that's my fun example. All right. That is color, the color wheel. You can get into, you know, what colors mean as well. Because colors evoke certain emotions. You can take, we'll get this in a second, but it's like the most popular color is blue. Okay, it makes you feel good. It's calm. If you see a blue sky, it's a sunny day. It's a good thing usually when you see blue. It's a very popular. It's like 40% of the population, blue is their favorite color. So that's why you have your IBM that is blue. You know, all these various corporate logos that are blue. Then you have your red, which is, you know, your more exciting color. Which is, they say it stimulates appetite. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but you'll always see red and oranges and yellows with restaurants. Your McDonald's and your Burger Kings and stuff like that. So, hold on one second, guys. I apologize. So you have blue, you can get into this, like purple has an air of like royalty. I'm surprised we don't use purple more, but it actually is kind of like a really royal color. You know, it's a really expensive color to make back in the day. And now we just don't use it that much. Black, it's like, okay, you wear black, it's like people, you know, it's like it makes you look slimmer, you know, it does. It makes things look sort of like darker and smaller. But it all has a certain meaning. All right, so let's get into this. Here we go. Sorry about that. You know, and again, I don't know who came up with half this stuff. Some of it makes sense to me, some of it doesn't. You know, royalty, spirituality for purple. Yeah, sure, I see that. You know, it was tough to make back in the day. You know, blue's the most popular. You know, green, if I want something sort of, you know, eco-friendly, kind of have this natural appearance, of course I'd use green. We can get into, wide in terms of security, peace and cleanliness, all this stuff. This yellow enhances concentration. Okay, but it also means you're like really focused. You'd never necessarily want to paint a room yellow because it's too much. It's too much focus. There's too much going on there. So if you can help it, don't paint a room yellow. They use green a lot in hospitals. Again, that washed out green. It's because it's that calming sense. Any one of those sort of cool colors is a little more calming. That's why they're used in these different areas. Yeah, so that's exactly why those colors were picked. So just be aware of what you're trying to do with color and what they do. I think it's pretty interesting. Okay, let's get into typography. And in the art field, you kind of have, don't mind me saying, you kind of have like the people that are really into type. They're like really into, really into it. I'm not one of those guys. I'm not really going to get into it because this is crazy. Because there's a whole community that really take it far. And I'm like, I don't know about that, What do? So you go through, so you need a type fix. I'm not sure how this is going to come out. So you come in and you pick, is it a logo for an invitation? You bounce around, is it something calligraphic maybe? You don't really need to bounce around and pick the right logo like I'm doing here. There's so many fonts out there. This is what you get slapped in the face when you go to your font menu. It's like, what do I pick, out of all these fonts? And honestly, at the end of the day, it just has to convey information in writing. That's all it has to do. There's more to it, but is it legible is really what type's job is. So let's not get all high and mighty. It just needs to make things legible. And designers are guilty of this one right here. I'll tell you right now. We'll get into typography and fonts in a second. But not making it legible. You've been to designer sites. I've been guilty of doing the 10-point type on my sites. I think it looks nice and elegant. Oh yeah, they have to read the information. I forgot about that. 10-point versus 12-point. This is the silly stuff, guys, that people start to look at. You'll see this bottom paragraph start to change, beef that up. That's now 14 points, actually. You can get into contrast, and it doesn't come across here, but then I add a white background behind it because there's a texture, but it's a little washed out. And I'm kind of torn on this. You guys can see between those two paragraphs, there's always been a controversy between sort of white text on a black background or black text on that white background. Which is easier to read? And it kind of comes down to personal opinion, but honestly, doesn't it look like the black text is a little easier to read? Okay, so that white text really starts to break down. You start to make this hierarchy. Again, making things larger so they're legible. As I do down here, we go from the same size to something larger. So we have our title and then our subtitle. Again, really straightforward stuff. But I don't see, again, designers making these mistakes, to be honest. But let's get into fonts. I want to choose a font that fits the subject. And we don't want to use, say, more than 2 or 3. If you're using 3, you're kind of pushing it. But again, all these rules are meant to be broken, by the way. So if you're starting out, just pick a couple fonts. It's simpler. I picked 2 different fonts. I don't know. It was like, I don't know if it's Gabby, old style, and then it's basically 2 fonts. It's 2 serif fonts. Okay? For that paragraph. But again, let's take a look at this. You guys might already be familiar with this as I jump into type. These are sort of the main classifications of type. And I'm not even going to go into all of these. But the short of it is you can start to really pick these apart by, you can say, hey, that's an old style because that old style has that glitter-thick look. So that the thin parts of that O are at an angle. That's an old style. Okay? That's what that is. You can get into the transitional, which is where they're vertical. You can see right here. Get into more modern. And again, this modern stroke has this, it's extreme thick and thin. That's a modern font. Slab serif. sans serif. And these are the two biggest things you need to take away from this. Is you have sans serif, which means without the little serifs. I'm trying to make this harder than it really is. It's not really that hard. But again, sans serif means without the serif, and then with the serif is obviously these big serifs right here. But those are all your fonts. Okay? And what a lot of people will do is they'll pair maybe a serif with a sans serif. Okay? You can have your title be your sans serif, and then your body copy be the serif. They say that serif type is easier to read, is what they say. Okay, in print. Because those curves lead you into the next letter. So they say, oh, it's easy to follow. Okay? That's what they say. When it comes to web design and these screens, those little serifs break down. So that's why you end up using your sans serif, which is your Helvetica, your Arial. Verdana, which was created for the computer screen, is a sans serif font. The issue with Verdana is it's really stretched out. If you've ever used it, it's like, it really stretches out text. Okay. But those are your two types, and we'll see that in action. A big trend these days in design is using these really fun script fonts, like this handwritten font. It's just like gorgeous. You'll see endless examples of that. And then we get into certain monospace, which is your spacing in between colors. But those are your fun type classifications. Stay with me. I know there's not going to be a test afterward necessarily. But those are your different fonts. This is the best way to do this online, because I love the computer. I'm not going to remember that slide, whatever. I'm going to go to typekit.com, which I love. It just shows me my web fonts. And when I do that, it breaks everything down. So it's like, you want to get a hold of those font nerds? Yeah, let's call it what it is. Get a hold of your buddy that really is into fonts. This is your buddy that's really into fonts. It's Typekit. And those classifications I just talked about are right up here. Sans serif, serif. Oh, let's go ahead and shuffle all of those fonts. Show me all the sans serif. Okay, that's good. Show me the fonts recommended for headings or paragraphs. Okay, let's do that. Sans serif for headings. Okay, that's cool. That's cool because some of these have some character. I like that. I like this one because it has a little bit of character. That's fun for a heading. And Typekit does all of that for me. If I get into sort of your thick, your thin, you can easily see how I can start to shuffle those around some more. So this is really powerful being able to use Typekit to find the fonts you want. Okay? So literally just going through, selecting on and off what you want. And you can start to even go and browse lists of fonts as well in Typekit. Okay, so alternatives to Helvetica. If you're bored of Helvetica because you use it all the time, you should default. Here's some nice alternatives to Helvetica. A little more interesting. Take it, like, run with it right away. And that's why I like Typekit. Easy to implement. Just like that. Okay, so we got Typekit in our back pocket. Another thing I wanted to show you guys really fast is these little in-browser tools. We have this, it's called What Font. Let's see if this is, just allows you to point to a font. So you go to a web page and you're like, I really like that font. What font, with that extension installed, I can just point to the font and it will tell me what that font is. Okay, it'll tell me what that font is. So what font is a really good tool when it comes to fonts. And sort of what you end up with, and again, this was your quick 5-minute demo. Here I did a mixture of a couple fonts up at the top, so I did B being different from that script font. We have a serif font and even serif body copy. Those are actually two different fonts, but they work well together. It starts to break up a little here on the screen, so again, I wish I would have known my audience, know where I was presenting. I could have done actually a little better job, to be honest. Notice one thing I didn't do, look at it's in 2 columns. You'll notice that. is like a general rule with design is to never have text that's wider than a dollar bill. Okay? You never have line length that goes longer than a dollar bill. Because by the time you're at that edge, you're like, where do I go back later? That's why it gets broken down into two columns. All right, so I thought it would be fun just to sort of take all this stuff, and again, I really wanted this to be, or I want this to be real world. And I said, what's the best way to show you guys how to do this sort of real world? And I thought I'd just take a moment just to kind of run through a design. Based on everything I've learned, I have just created this video. I was given the task of creating this design. How do I execute this design? This is in Photoshop. Use whatever tool you want. I said, okay, well, let's just go ahead and see. Just so you can see what I did, I come in, I start working on the title. This is the travel spotlight for Africa. Let's pick a fun font. I picked Edwardian. So I'm like, okay, I want something with some flavor. Okay, and I start to organize that too. And I start to create this nice, what I think is a nice lockup. And provided I'm zoomed out a little bit there, but I create that lockup, I start creating this body copy. You know, I talked about that golden mean. That's why I made one column a little larger than the other. I said, okay, I need some imagery, and I'm going to jump out and find images for this design. So I grab some images and load them into the design. I don't know which one I'm going to use yet, I just kind of want to know what's going to work for this design. I go through and start creating this nice big like promo area or just large header image. This is really your focus, is that large image. So text is below. Say, okay, that's looking pretty good. And start to mask that out and work that way. So positioning that appropriately. Screwed up there, don't mind that. But again, this is within 20 minutes. I'm taking all this stuff. I like this idea of having it semi-transparent. It creates this nice depth. So I made that panel at the top is now semi-transparent, and I inverted the text. I said, okay, that area is larger. Let's go ahead and make a little spot in the upper left-hand corner, because that's where everybody looks first for in a website. You know, and I can play with that. I sampled from that photo, and that's what I used for the logo. And it looks great as I even transition to, there's another image that I have there as well. So I have this large image, and honestly, it gets kind of boring. So I'm like, I need to add some subsequent images as well. Okay, so this is just too boring, too straightforward. So like, okay, let's make these smaller, like promo images down beneath that. And those will be selectable. I'm going to jump out to that area. Again, I'm taking some liberties here, but I can see, you know, these different images are the ones that I want to start to highlight in this lower area. Again, creating that depth by just having that little shadow, pushing that back, having that shadow as I start to create this depth with all of these, giving them a shadow as well. And I like this image. This image worked really well because you have the complementary colors. It's like you have that blue color, and then you have the gold in there as well. So that worked out pretty well. Otherwise, I think everything gets a little beige. Let's be honest. You know. And the best thing I've ever done in my career, I'm making a lot of mistakes. The one thing I've done is I've listened to other people, designers and non-designers. And I'll show this to them. It's like, do you like this? You think it sucks? If people think it sucks, I'm going to take a stab at it, you know, because I just wouldn't. So again, laying those out, start, let's hold this touch. Adding more of a soft to drop shadow across the board, across all of them, adjusting them appropriately. Kind of like that. 4 seemed like the right number for those, but again, I'm just playing with it. Using my alignment, making sure it goes from photo to photo, as you can see there. Extending the page. Down here again, it gets boring. What are we going to have? We're going to have a title down there as well. What do? I take the logo, I take the fonts used in that logo, and I bring them down there, and I just duplicate it for those errors. Okay, so I jump in. Kruger National Park, again, it gets broken up a little bit on the screen, but it looks good right up here. And you can see I've used those same fonts in that area, giving them some space, and then making that header over there on that side. I'll go through and start to play with that content. Let's just fast forward this a little bit as I start to change that text and make that stand out just right. So I like that. I still think it gets boring, and I'm thinking I need to divide up the page a little bit, so I think it'll be a little more interesting. This is just me playing with this. I said, okay, let's change that background. Let's make it like a nice panel. I have transparency going on up there, and I want to keep the design consistent. So I'm going to have this transparency in both areas. So I'm taking that sort of texture of like that grass, that tall grass, and I'm putting it right down there behind that. And again, this is something I'm trying that I thought would be kind of fun to do in this design. And that's the end of it. That's what I ended up with. Again, I probably adjusted more, but I mean, hopefully that was kind of a glimpse into, whether you're a designer or not, that's a glimpse into what a designer would do in Photoshop. Cool? Does that kind of make sense? And this was only 20 minutes, so what I would turn around with this is I would show it to my friends, and designer, non-designer, I would show it to everybody and say, hey, what do you think of this? Does it really suck? Did I get too involved in this one little area? Is everything too beige? My biggest complaint of this are those images are too large and stand out way too much. You got these big, bold, white borders, and then they have those drop shadows. They're already coming forward at you. There's way too much attention on those 4 images. I don't quite want that much attention on them, so I want to jump in there and change that as well. What time is supposed to end? 11:30?
Yeah.
Right now? All right, guys. I think that's it. I'm going to just click through a couple slides because I want to be respectful of your time. But just some final notes as you get into this is don't try to be great as a designer. Just try to not be invisible. Just to show your content. Don't ask us to put a starburst behind it, because clients ask you to like have things pop out. And I was put a starburst back there or something. Don't use yellow text on a white background, as you can see there. Don't use Comic Sans, unless you got a really strong reason to. And yeah, that's it. So thank you so much, everybody.